Boldwood presents The Three Loves of Sebastian Cooper. Written by Zoë Folbigg and read by Josie Charles. The moral right of the author has been asserted. This performance is owned by Boldwood. Part 1. Chapter 1. June 2019, North Hill, Oxfordshire. Don't look. Don't look. Claire Cooper kept her eyeline down, towards the carpentry and carpet at the base of the pale stone plinth, framed by a mushroom-coloured curtain with a neat pelmet at the top, twee frills and folds in calming muted shades that did nothing to reflect the character, the vibrancy of the man approaching in the coffin on the shoulders of broken giants. It reminded Claire of a nightmare she used to have when she was a child, a monster she mustn't make eye contact with or she'd die. The monster had broken into her home and was on the rampage, and Claire and her younger sisters had to hide behind a table and not open their eyes. Claire would feel that compulsion to do it in her dream, daring to rise and see what the beast looked like, knowing that if she made eye contact, she would never wake up. Don't look. Don't look. But she always woke, just in time, crying out for her parents and sisters in a raging hot sweat. This was a nightmare Claire couldn't wake from, but she kept her gaze fixed firmly to the join of the plinth and the floor. She couldn't die today. The kids would have no one. He's coming. She stared into space, noticing the swirls in the stone at the base of the plinth, trying to filter out the sounds of the coffin's approach, the howls of a wailing woman across the aisle, the gentle tones of Coldplay's Yellow. The casket creaked faintly against the sound of footsteps, music, and cries. Claire had helped Seb's parents choose a coffin made of bamboo lattice and rope. She'd never had the discussion with Seb before. What sort of coffin do you want? Why would she? But she decided, along with his parents, Martin and Tina, Penelope and Peter, that Seb wouldn't have wanted anything stuffy or heavy. He wouldn't want to leave a negative impact on the planet. So they'd chosen the greenest option the funeral director had. It sounded a bit flimsy now, with Seb approaching in it. As Claire kept her eyes fixed down, limiting her window to the world, she pulled in her daughter, Millie, under her right arm and kissed her long hair. Millie curled into her mother, trying to fold teenage limbs and tuck herself inside Claire's armpit, but she was almost as tall as her mother. Under Claire's left arm, her hand resting on his right leg, her son, Jasper, clutched his camera, scrolling through holiday photos on the screen of his digital SLR. Claire had encouraged Jasper to look at the photos on the screens on the walls on either side of the pleated curtain, a tactful slideshow of an exuberant man with piercing blue eyes, a strong nose, and a broad, mischievous smile, to bring Jasper out of his bubble, help the reality sink in. But he didn't like looking at his dad as a baby. His dad in a cowboy outfit, his dad's graduation photo, his dad on his wedding day, even though he liked how happy his dad and his mum looked. Jasper couldn't remember much about his parents being together. He didn't like the photos on the big screen because he didn't recognise the man everyone else in the chapel was looking at, tilting their heads to one side as they clutched tissues. Jasper preferred to look down at his own camera roll. His dad, playful and cross-eyed as he sucked on a milkshake at the 11th Street Diner in Miami. His dad from behind, in shorts, a pale lilac t-shirt and Converse, outside the Carlisle as he walked towards its white deco facade. His dad, arm wrapped around Millie, both smiling at the camera as they stopped on the boardwalk to take a picture. It was the last photo Jasper had of his father. It was taken only 4 weeks ago. Jasper, feeling the comfort of his mother's hand on his leg, leaned into his grandma on his left and scrolled through the camera roll again. He, too, could hear the coffin approaching. He tried to ignore it, tried to find another tiny detail in a photo he might have missed, zooming in, zooming out, checking every idiosyncrasy of his dad's face. The wholehearted, infectious smile surrounded by sunlit stubble, his brown ruffled hair, the bright blue irises encircled with black hoops that made his eyes look all the more brighter. his tanned nose and reliable shoulders Jasper wanted to hug and hide in. No offence to Grandma Gilbert. Jasper didn't realise his dad was handsome until after he died. There was a lot of detail a 9-year-old noticed. The bony contours of a Stygimoloch dinosaur's skull, the lines and circles of an old computer motherboard, the options on the screen of a digital SLR, and there was a lot they didn't. As the whimpers became more breathless and the wave of cries rolled forward through the crematorium, Claire turned left, then right, to kiss each child's head, then returned her gaze defiantly down. She felt her sisters behind her squeeze a shoulder each, recognised the quiet cry and coughs of her mother and father next to them. Don't look. Don't look. In her small window to the world, Claire saw smart shoes edge into sight, doing an awkward dance as the 6 men who filled them did their best not to drop the casket. It was the most important job of their lives. Don't drop him. The feet shuffled, arched, bent, until the bamboo casket, shaped like a sarcophagus and topped with white roses, snapdragons and stocks, was placed on the stone plinth, and the footsteps retreated. 6 ashen pallbearers, relieved that that part was over, grateful that a woman in the congregation's cries were taking the focus off them, still shocked that the life of their most vibrant of comrades had been extinguished. Claire looked at the anguished dance of a variation of black shoes. Jake's were obviously the Burberry brogues. Uncle Roger's were definitely the shabbiest. Seb's dad, Martin, his shoes must have been the most polished, slightly creased along the toe, but shiny as a new penny. Anyway, Claire could tell which shoes were Martin's from the way they turned in. Even his feet looked sad. Don't look, don't look. You might die. Did they put shoes on his body? Don't look, don't look. Which suit did they use? Don't look, don't look. Did Penelope put his wedding ring on him, or did she keep it for the kids? Cries rose as Chris Martin sang about skin and bones. I hope she didn't have any say in what Seb's wearing. Claire felt a silent roar of protectiveness and pulled Millie and Jasper in closer still as they huddled, shell-shocked and heartbroken. Jasper finally looked up, away from his camera, and saw the sarcophagus. No, he whispered, a stealthy cry slipping out involuntarily as he looked at the casket. 8 rows back, Jasper's best friend Arthur shook with his own silent cries, hoping his shared grief would take some of the pain away for his friend. Millie looked at the coffin fleetingly. The lure of knowing her dad was there, maybe she could see him one last time, made her eyes dart for just a second. The burst of flowers she had chosen with Claire looked beautiful, and Millie started to shake. It's okay, darling, Claire whispered, squeezing Millie in, knowing that it wasn't. Inhaling her children's scents, trying to pull their anguish out of them and into her with each inward breath. She looked up to the pitched roof of the chapel to release her pained breath and exhaled. Why did I let you go? Please be seated, said the sympathetic vicar with a greying bob, although Claire and the kids hadn't been able to get out of their chairs. As the murmuration of mourners lowered onto their seats, Claire glanced back over her shoulder at a sea of people who had stuck to traditional black, even though they had said to come in anything. Colour was what Seb would have wanted. The family, friends, colleagues and cousins who had got there early enough to get a seat, the acquaintances and school parents Seb had befriended over the years, standing at the back, stunned. People were bursting out of the doors of the crematorium beyond a portico, clutching their orders of service and shaking with stifled tears. Claire's fiancé, Dave, leaned forward from his seat next to Claire's youngest sister, squeezing her shoulder and letting her know he was here for her too. She gave a short smile to let him know she appreciated it as she leaned forward to glance across the aisle, still avoiding looking at the casket. Don't look. Don't look. On the other side of the aisle, Claire saw Uncle Roger and Auntie Dora sitting next to Seb's father, Martin, a man who had inspired and disappointed Seb in such immense ways, who, pallbearing duty done, lowered into his seat next to his wife and their daughter. Claire leaned forward a little more to see if that most anguished of cries, the one that was ensuring it was the loudest, was coming from Seb's half-sister, but she could only see Jake, tall and imposing, at the end of the line. Seb's best friend, and he of the Burberry brogues, repositioning himself in his seat next to his wife, Christine. Jake gave Claire a gentle, heartbroken nod, and Claire gave an even smaller one. And then Claire saw her, a few rows behind Seb's dad, cheekbones hollow, eyes empty. The woman her husband had left her for. Claire looked back quickly to her safe spot, the join of the plinth and the floor, as she waited for Reverend Jane's eulogy to begin. She thought about a boy no one could take away from her, the cheeky boy in biology, almost flirting with the flustered teacher with those eyes, the opportunistic boy sliding his arm around her neck in the dark of the cinema, a vinyl record tucked inside his bomber jacket, waiting to give it to her when the lights came up. Chapter 2. Claire, October 1994, Guernsey.
Baby, I love your way. Cool.
Seb's khaki bomber jacket offset his late summer tan as they came out of the Beau Séjour Leisure Centre, which doubled up as a cinema and a theatre. They had just watched The Lion King, a compromise after Seb had wanted to see Speed and Claire 4 Weddings and a Funeral. But The Lion King was the only film showing today, and they were relieved they both fancied it. Claire had sobbed into Seb's arm as Simba scrambled around for his father, embarrassed she might have left some snot on his shoulder. But he stroked her long ponytail and wondered whether now might be the time to lean in for a kiss. No, he thought. Too opportunistic. Even for a 15-year-old boy with raging hormones, Seb was good at reading a room. I'll have a much better chance when I give her the record. As they came out of the Bosey and walked the cobblestones of the compact capital towards St. Peter's Port's yachts, motorboats, clippers and ferries on the picturesque harbour, eyes adjusting to the daylight, Seb straightened the vinyl he'd squirreled away inside his jacket in the cinema. The 12-inch record had been jabbing at his ribs for 2 hours before they stopped on the water's edge so he could give it to Claire. The cover was slightly crumpled in all 4 corners, so he smoothed it out as he presented it to her proudly. "What's it for, though?" Claire asked in surprise. Her tone came across as curt, even when she was mush inside. It was why people always thought she was more serious than she was.
It's for you,
Seb grinned. That's very sweet of you. Claire didn't tell Seb that her dad, Adrian's record player, was broken. Years of abuse at the hands of Claire and her sisters, Elizabeth and Rachel, playing the Annie soundtrack over and over while doing a routine to You're Never Fully Dressed Without a Smile, or divvying up the roles on the Grease soundtrack. Claire was always Frenchy, Elizabeth was Rizzo on account of having dark hair, and Rachel was Sandy on account of being blonde. 3 sisters with 3 different hair colours. Seb didn't need to know any of that, and it didn't matter. This record was the first love token Claire had ever received, and she was going to put it up on her wall like artwork, not play it. She looked at Seb and sighed. She was desperate for him to kiss her, and she rose a little on the balls of her feet. The autumn sky was already darkening. St. Peter's Port's tall, narrow buildings in shades of white, cream, peach and pink were dulled by the looming grey sky. But that didn't matter either. In Claire's heart, a sunbeam broke through and was illuminating just the 2 of them, in a bubble by the lapping water against the harbour walls. Claire had warm brown eyes and mid-brown hair that was golden at the tips for all the outdoors activities she and her sisters spent the summer doing. Surfing, canoeing, sailing, lacrosse. Winters, too. Her cheeks were always flushed pink in summer, red in winter, and her small waist, full bottom and strong legs gave her a sporty, wholesome quality in her jeans, long-sleeve tops and gilets. She ditched her comfy walking shoes today, though, in favour of Elizabeth's brown ankle boots, fleece-lined to keep her feet warm. Claire always had cold feet. Her eyes were pretty, but not heart-stopping. Her cheeks were flushed, but not defined. Her mouth was full, but not jaw-dropping. Everything about Claire was neatly proportioned and symmetrical, giving her a kindness and neutrality that made her a confidant to everyone. Any prettier, and the mean girls would have seen her as a threat. Any more wholesome, and the nerds would have thought she was one of their own. Claire Armitage's warm eyes and clipped tones made her a friendly and no-nonsense ally to everyone. And boys fancied her. Not the way they fancied Kayleen Hartley, big tits, or Megan Bell, insanely flirty, but in an under-the-radar way. Sebastian Cooper, who Claire sat next to in French, biology, and was on the mixed lacrosse team with, seemed to fancy her. She hadn't realised it until Seb asked her one day in French if she wanted to go to "un surprise party," he joked in his best French accent, at his house, and suddenly his cocky smile and cheeky eyes went all serious. Seb lived in the forest region of Guernsey, on the south of the island, in a modern glass box house facing France. His dad, Martin, designed the home in the early 80s, but spent much of his time away from it, travelling with work as an architect, or on the mainland, in the Oxford office he had started with his best friend Roger, the Curtis of Curtis and Cooper. Seb's mother, Penelope, was an artist who loved capturing the bleak days over the channel the best, painting moody seascapes of the space between her garden and Brittany, which she sold in St. Peter's Port's small shops and galleries. For someone whose paintings were so grey and foreboding, she had a glorious sense of serenity and calm that befitted her willowy beauty. "Oh, Sebastian, look at the stars," she would gush at the night sky. "Darling, would you like some winter tea?" her soft voice would call if Seb had a cold. "You can stay at home, just for today," she would say with a knowing smile when Seb was pretending to be sick. His mother would see through all of Seb's charades, but still mopped his brow, tended to him, got him soup, and kept a peaceful house, while Seb read under a blanket on the sofa as Penelope painted in the top-floor studio. The quiet was just disquieting enough for a lively and sociable boy like Seb to want to go back to school the next day. He adored watching his mother paint, but he loved to be around people, and the rabble of his friends, Jake, Leo and Woody, even more. Penelope was warm and welcoming to any friend Seb brought home. He had always assumed it was because he was an only child, that his mum had to go the extra mile to have young voices in the house. Actually, it was that she had a lovely and welcoming heart. She liked her space, but she liked other people to enjoy it too. You were always looked after in Penelope Gilbert Cooper's house. She'd tidy your shoes in a pair by the front door, and would brandish a jug of lemonade and a tray of pastries or cookies when boys were playing basketball on the driveway, or on the Amstrad and Game Boy in Seb's room. Penelope would breeze past, offering goods, her short blonde hair dressed in a wrap of a silk scarf that flowed down her back. The first time Claire went to Seb's house was for his mother's 40th birthday party. Martin had organised a surprise and all their island friends came, plus Uncle Roger and his wife, Dora, from the mainland. Roger wasn't really an uncle, but he was Seb's father's best friend and business partner, and he had been around for all of Seb's life. He taught Seb to play pool, advised Seb on GCSE options. They spent holidays together. Roger and Dora's daughters, Emily and Zara, were slightly older than Seb, and he referred to them as his English cousins. They were handy when it came to Seb's sex education. They had first told him about periods, kissing, and how a penis actually slotted into a vagina, and not through the belly button, as Seb thought. Zara even let Seb try kissing on her, and rated him as good when the flustered 12-year-old came up for air. Martin told Seb he could invite 5 friends to his mother's 40th birthday party, so he chose his best mates, Jake, Leo and Woody, plus Claire Armitage and her friend, Lucia Pereira, who Jake fancied. Seb was doubly pleased when Claire said yes. He was a people-pleaser, so he was even happier for Jake, who had been obsessing about Lucia, who had glossy black hair, broad shoulders and long brown legs, for months than he was for himself. The party felt elegant and grown up to the teens, who ate blinis and mixed bad cocktails at the drink station. All the grown-ups looked super old, apart from Penelope, who was the youngest in their social circle, having had Seb at 25. At 10 p.m, Martin gave a heartfelt speech about his beloved Penny from Heaven and everything she had achieved. What an amazing, loving, patient mother she was. What an exceptional oil painter. How her soft voice and calm demeanour could disarm his worst of moods. How their finest creation was their son, Sebastian, who they both adored. Martin was never shy to get emotional after a few brandies and tell people how much he loved them. Everyone said, "Aw," and looked around the room for Seb, standing at the front of a large circle in their living room. Claire noticed how handsome his bashful face was, how his eyes sparkled and his cheeks had flushed pink. He ruffled the back of his hair and looked embarrassed, but inside he was bursting with pride. His mum was awesome. He agreed with everything his dad said, and he said it so charmingly and confidently. He felt his dad was pretty awesome too. His parents were enviably united. He felt secure. Seb stole a glance at Claire along the line from him, who was smiling for him, and he half wished his other friends weren't there. Leo and Woody were being goons, and Jake and Lucia must have sneaked off to the garden. "To Penelope!" Martin cheered, and he commanded everyone to raise their champagne flutes and follow him out to the driveway, where a blue Lotus Elan sat with a large silver bow on it.
There are no motorways on Guernsey,
Roger guffawed. "Darling," exclaimed Penelope. "Cool," Seb's friends gasped, except for Jake and Lucia, who had just been making out on the boot of it and had to scram to the bushes. A week after Penelope's party, Seb had asked Claire to the cinema on their own. No big family do and people to have to explain. No jibes from Leo and Woody trying to be funny. Just him, Claire, and a 12-inch of Baby I Love Your Way by Big Mountain between them. "Thank you," she said crisply, liquid brown eyes burning into his bright ones, hoping her perfunctory tone wouldn't put him off. "I love it." As the song spun in her head, Claire rose a little higher onto her fleece-warm tiptoes, closed her eyes, and kissed Sebastian Cooper for the very first time. Chapter 3. June 2019, North Hill, Oxfordshire. "She's seen me. Back here." Desiree Cruz Campbell didn't miss much with her wide, astute eyes. She had seen Claire's lightning-quick glance, along the front row, back to her, and then forward in a flash, as fast as she had registered her, checking to see who was wailing. It's not me crying like that. Checking to see that Desiree was there, in her place, fourth row back, away from the kids. She picked a thread of cotton off her lap with her free hand from her impeccable black leather pencil skirt and dropped it to the floor. I so want to talk to them. The kids Desiree also loved and her heart broke for. The kids she missed terribly. She missed taking Millie shopping for footless tights and frappuccinos. She missed talking to her about what was coming up at Sadler's Wells, or, better still, taking her there to see a show. She missed baking with Jasper, even though she wasn't much of a baker and didn't have a sweet tooth. And Jasper's quiet demeanour meant Desiree wasn't sure if he was having fun or not. But she had dug out the scales on the weekend Seb had the kids, so she could bond with him. Baking suited Jasper, the science and mechanics, the silence and precision. And she, Seb, and the kids all enjoyed the ritual of sitting down on Saturday afternoon with a cup of tea and a slice of whatever. Rum cake was her happiest baking memory. She had called Granny for the recipe, and Jasper pretended to be drunk half an hour after polishing it off. It was the most playful Desiree had ever seen him. I did that. I made him smile. From her angle now, on the right-hand side of the aisle, 4 rows back, she couldn't see Jasper's face, but she pictured the grief in his small, polite features. She saw Claire's protective arm around Millie, shielding her. She felt a twitch of the hand she was holding. "Are you okay, Granny?" Desiree whispered gently to the shrunken woman sitting next to her, with the lined brown face and huge round glasses, as she squeezed her hand back, released it, and repositioned them both so they were enveloped in a huge shawl. "Are you cold? Would you like an order of service?" It was a warm day in early summer, but Granny was often cold, and the crematorium must have been air-conditioned with so many people in it. The stowaway with shrunken bones and a colourful hat with 3 felt flowers on it took the order of service gratefully from her granddaughter, but didn't say a word. She didn't open it for now. Instead, she clutched it in her tiny gloved hand to take home and read later. Desiree's grandmother, Violetta, liked to collect funeral orders of service, and at 89, she had a lot of them in her bureau. But this was the most harrowing funeral she had been to, after burying her beloved Wilfred 10 years ago. But this felt like the most unjust. Sadness coiled around her slowing heart, wringing it and choking it, even though her wrinkled face looked serene and unmoved. Violetta had wanted to come to pay her respects, despite the mission to get her there. Despite the concerns of Desiree's parents, who themselves had wanted to come, but were flying back from holiday and couldn't make it. They were half relieved Desiree wouldn't be alone, even though she would have lots of friends there. "Okay, well, be careful, Desi love, and get her home safe," her mother had said from a sun lounger in Tulum. "I will, Mum. Promise." Desiree had left her flat in Clapham at 7 a.m. to drive to Portsmouth, pick up her granny from her old people's home on the seafront, and drive them to Oxfordshire to make it in time for the funeral at 1 p.m. Violetta had adored Seb since Desiree first brought him to visit her on Spice Island. He was charming, friendly. She was mesmerised by the brightness of his eyes, and he loved her wicked sense of humour. Seb had listened intently to stories of Violetta's youth in the Caribbean. She talked as if she had been a swashbuckling pirate, swigging rum and swinging from ship to ship. In truth, she had. The tiny woman, whose sparkling brown eyes had disappeared under the myriad folds of her eyelids, gave a gentle nod and a bewildered smile that couldn't convey she was trying to soak up Desiree's pain. So they sat, united under the shawl, listening to the music come to an end. Desiree looked to the front again, to the backs of Millie's and Jasper's heads, willing the kids to turn around so she could see their faces, tell them how loved they were, how happy they had made their father in his last days. She looked to the bamboo casket and wondered what Seb looked like. She knew all of his sleeping faces, but not his dead one. But the thought nearly winded her, so she clutched Granny's hand again. She pondered the craziness of the past few weeks, how hard it had been to try to visit him in the Chapel of Rest, the obstacles and barriers put in place in order that she would give up. It's just as well. Seb was such an alive man. Despite the frustrations and phone calls from her office in Shoreditch to the funeral parlour in North Hill, she dropped her usual determination and conceded that perhaps it was for the best. She would rather remember him at his most vibrant. She would rather remember his haunting words when they last spoke. She thought back to the conversation she had mulled over 1,000 times. She thought about the final time she saw him. She had made him drink a floral cocktail before she hurried to her meeting and he went to catch his flight. She'd looked at him over their small table and thought, even after all that time, how handsome he was. Piercing, flirtatious eyes, as blue as the sea off the cliffs of Negril, encircled in a hoop of black. She had contemplated 1,000,000 times what those eyes might look like on a child with brown skin like hers. It was a fantasy she hadn't dared articulate, and now it would never happen. As they drank cocktails in a hotel bar overlooking the Thames, Seb gave off a sense of liveliness. There was a chaos and an optimism in him that went against the sadness of their circumstances. She thought about a confession. secrets they both held back, how they didn't matter now. She thought about their final kiss as she got up and left, his eyes looking back at her, as intrigued as they were the day they met. I wish I could go back. As the music came to an end, Reverend Jane stepped up to the lectern of the chapel and smiled. It's too late. Chapter 4. Clair, May 1997, Guernsey.
Quick, Claire, it's Leo.
Woody burst into Claire and Seb's huddle on the dance floor, pulling them apart and breaking up their kiss as they moved slowly, like a mirror ball in gentle rotation to Wonderwall. Jesus Christ! Claire snapped, angry from the shock of Woody having made them jump. What's he done now? She groaned. Seb pulled back and smiled as he ran his fingers through his hair, rolling his eyes as if to say, what is it this time?
He's puking purple all over the breakfast room. It's the whitest fucking room in the hotel. All the rooms are white, Woody, Seb deadpanned. The breakfast room was only painted yesterday. My dad is going to go mental.
Woody grabbed Claire by the hand and led her out, her black and red Chinese-style dress hugging her tiny waist and big hips, followed by Seb in a tux and a don't mind me look. They weaved from the main dining room, which had been converted into a ballroom/disco, along the corridor to the conservatory where breakfast was to be served in the sunshine. Except the sun didn't shine through the fronds of the palm trees outside it at 1 a.m. The breakfast room was stark and dark. It smelled of fresh paint and vomit. Woody's parents had bought a wreck of a building on the nearby island of Herm, raised it, and built a pristine hotel not far from the small docking jetty, painting it all white and foolishly agreeing to let Woody hold his 18th birthday/end-of-exams party there the weekend before the hotel was due to open. All their friends and most of their year group had taken the catamaran at sunset from St. Peter's Port, their finery getting creased and flecked with saltwater splashes. Claire had captained her family's weather-worn Beneteau sailboat, taking Seb, Jake, Lucia, Leo, and his girlfriend Elise, who went to another school but seemed cool, with her. On the journey over, standing at the back of the boat with her hand on the wheel, Claire had looked over the heads of their friends on board, ahead to Seb at the front, sitting on the bow in his new suit, legs dangling as he watched the sun set beyond the silhouette of the hotel ahead, at the pale sandy beaches that skirted the island. The puffins, gannets and storm petrels had already tucked themselves up for the day, and Claire, satin dress accessorised with a life jacket, had looked at Seb's thoughtful face and wondered what he was thinking. I love him so much. Claire felt like the luckiest girl in the world. To have fallen in love with Sebastian Cooper, to have lost her virginity and had wonderful, meaningful sex with him, to have finished her A-levels and be privileged enough to sail with her friends, the people she adored most in the world after her parents and sisters, to an idyllic island for one last hurrah. Claire had felt so lucky in that moment, she almost hadn't wanted to reach Herm. Bloody hell, Leo, what are you doing? Claire gasped at the boy curled in a ball on the floor. Woody, wearing a checked suit and a busy bow tie to distract from his enormous ears, was almost tearing his hair out. Right, help me get him on his side, Claire commanded, as she and Seb rolled Leo, retching and heaving purple liquid that smelled of onions, aspartame and bile, all over one side of the hexagonal-shaped conservatory room. Mind that wall! Mind that wall! Woody shouted, skinny arms and legs flailing all over the place. Ugh, Seb winced, trying not to inhale the smell, while Claire positioned Leo, away from her dress, to face the skirting board.
You fucking puke on that wall and...
Get a grip, Woody, Claire scolded. Seb, get me some towels from the restaurant toilet. Woody, do you have a bucket? Woody looked blank while he tried to think. Does anyone know where Elise is? Claire asked. Leo groaned. Jake was up in the super deluxe suite, christening it with Carrie Woodrow, his third shag since Lucia had dumped him when he was 16, which Lucia put down to his wandering eye, but actually it was because she fancied girls like Carrie Woodrow more than she fancied Jake. She just hadn't told anyone yet. Revellers were stopping to revel in Leo and his misfortune. You could always rely on Leo to take things too far, so people stepped over him with a Nelson Muntz-style ha-ha. As they stumbled through the breakfast room on their way to the ballroom, the reception, the back garden and the pool, where head boy Damien Congreve was dive-bombing in his tails. Claire stroked the bone around Leo's sweaty eye sockets, soothing and calming him into a restful fetal pose. "Elise," Leo mumbled as his seasick head started to relax a little. Claire kept her hand on his brow as she looked out of the window panels. "I'm not sure people should be in the pool, Woody," she said in a schoolmarm tone, nodding to the splashes rising into view beyond the glass. "They fucking shouldn't," he said through gawkish lips. "It cost £800 to have it cleaned yesterday. I'm going to have to pay it if it needs cleaning again." Woody froze, looking like Shaggy from Scooby-Doo in a suit, not knowing which fire to fight first. "Worse still is if someone drowns, Woody," Claire admonished. "Go and tell them to get out of the pool. Seb and I can sort Leo." As if on cue, Seb came rushing back in with all the hand towels he could carry from the basket in the restaurant toilets, all white of course, and helped Claire use them to mop Leo's brow, his face, and the purple sick on the floor. "The drugs don't work," Leo said labouredly between the retches, which were now dry. "Drugs?" Claire scowled. "Jesus, Seb, what's he taken?" Seb put his hands up as if to say, "I don't know." "Snake bite and black, the pussy," Jake laughed as he walked through the swing doors fresh from the bedroom, Carrie giggling conspiratorially under his arm. "Want one?" He held up his pint glass to Seb that looked a shade similar to the sick on the floor. Claire saw the twinkle in Seb's eye, the spark of a challenge. "Don't you dare," she snapped. "I am not cleaning up after you, too." "It's sunstroke," protested Leo, now crying again in a ball. "Elise." Despite the chaos, despite knowing she would be scrabbling around to find an empty bed or sofa on which to sleep with Seb, despite the fact she knew she would be mucking in and cleaning up an entire hotel in the morning before sailing home, Claire didn't want the night to end. She loved her friends, even the stupid ones. She loved the Channel Islands and the idyll of her life there. She loved Sebastian Cooper. And she knew that when they all went off to university, to York and Oxford and Warwick and Birmingham, to opposite sides of London in her and Seb's cases, they would probably all drift apart. The odds weren't exactly in their favour. Chapter 5. June 2019, North Hill, Oxfordshire. "Who are all these people? Why are they looking at me?" Glancing fleetingly over her shoulder, Noemie Morel saw the burn of 200 pairs of eyes boring into her skull. Or that was what it felt like in the hot front row of the chapel. Her turquoise vest and floaty colour-block skirt, no black for this bohemian woman, encouraged a trickle of sweat to run down the base of her spine as she hugged her ribs and rocked back and forth. She tried to regulate her breaths with the jingle-jangle chiming of the chains on her wrists and ankles, moving as she moved. "Doucement, ma chérie, doucement," her mother said next to her in a low command. "Respire comme au yoga." The involuntary wails came and went as Noemie gazed at the casket placed on the plinth in front of her. If she put her hand out, she might be able to touch him. Instead, she hugged herself and kept rocking, sometimes looking frantically left and right along the row. All these people. People she didn't really know, apart from Seb's father, Martin, and her own mother, Camille, both in the limits of her blurred peripheral vision. Aside from Millie and Jasper, she didn't recognise anyone on the other side of the aisle, the hordes of people behind. She looked down the other end of the row, further along her side, and saw Jake and his wife Christine by the window. She hadn't even registered Jake was one of the pallbearers as Martin had sat down next to her. She hadn't realised Christine was sitting alone at the end of the row as she waited for her husband. He was nice to me. Noemie had met Jake, Christine, and their baby Axel once, a couple of months ago, at a barbecue at their house in the Cotswolds over Easter weekend. Jake had been nice. Noemie had liked how tall, warm and handsome he was as he welcomed them with open arms and popped open bottle after bottle of red. But she hadn't liked the way Christine hugged her baby protectively, the way she clearly didn't want to hear Noemie's parenting advice, the way she spoke in her American accent, the way she gave Noemie polite smiles and said sweetly that she was figuring it all out, one day at a time, shutting Noemie down. What does she know, Seb? Noemie had said in the car on the way back to North Hill. She's had one baby. I've had 4. She thinks she knows better than me? Noemie hadn't liked Christine at all. Miss I and Mighty, Noemie thought as she looked along the row and Christine returned a sympathetic smile, her glittering brown eyes filled with tears. Something about Christine's glossy hair and polished makeup, in her tight dress and high heels, made Noemie assume she was an ally of Desiree, which further added to her mistrust. At least they didn't bring their ugly kid. They bring their baby and I can't bring mine? Noemie's erratic breath sped up at the thought of her kids not being in their rightful place around her, and she started to hyperventilate a little more. She put her palms on her temples. Doucement, Noah. Doucement. It's okay, mouthed Jake from against the window as he leaned forward. Noemie looked at him, sitting in a sharp suit with his arm around his wife, handsome face ashen from the burden of carrying his dead best friend on his shoulders, of the tribute he was preparing to deliver. He met Noemie's eyes and tried to calm her with a nod, so her cries wouldn't further traumatize Millie and Jasper, so the congregation would be able to hear what Reverend Jane was about to say. Noemie looked back through her tears, her mouth open in distress. He look at me funny. He thinks this is my fault. Noemie's breathing started to race again. Doucement, ma chérie, doucement. Noemie's stout mother, with silver hair and high cheekbones, tucked a strand of beachy blonde hair behind her daughter's ear as she tried to regulate her cries. Doucement, Noemie. Tout ira bien. Noemie tried to ignore Jake and Christine bringing her down. She focused on Martin to her left. He had a presence about him she'd found attractive when she first met him on Christmas Eve. A presence that made her wonder what kind of a lover he was. He had the same bright eyes as Seb, the same charming smile. Only Martin was more ruggedly handsome, more craggy and tanned. His forehead lined with deep creases, made even deeper by grief. Noemie had sought comfort in Martin's face since Seb died, since he had flown out to help her. Martin had held her when there was no one else to, while he and Jake got down to the practicalities of paperwork and repatriation. He hadn't questioned Noemie too much. He'd let her speak when she was ready. His harrowed face was comforting, although she was so heavily sedated it was all a blur. She couldn't even remember what she had told him. She looked down at her skirt. Tiered blocks of turquoise, fuchsia and cream. Her mother's hands on her knee. Seb's father's right leg pressing up against her left. She pondered Jake's nod. It wasn't all kindness. He's shutting me up. And with that she burst into a loud, curdling cry that even made Reverend Jane look taken aback. They think I did this. Chapter 6. Clair. July 1997, London. It was a strange feeling to walk around your father's home, not knowing which kitchen cupboards housed the glasses or how to unlock the little balcony door that looked out onto the Thames. But after Seb and Claire dropped their backpacks onto the bed of the spare room one Tuesday lunchtime in early July, they excitedly looked around the Limehouse flat, opening windows onto the marina and exploring cupboards to get a gauge of what food they needed to buy. The flat was like many in the Riverside complex in a wharf off Narrow Street. Newly built apartments bought by city boys who liked to look at the view of Canary Wharf, to appreciate how much money they made working there. Men who favoured black pleather sofas and enjoyed the trappings of champagne socialism, unwittingly bankrolling murders in Central America through the cocaine they snorted at dinner parties, where the food was fair trade and organic. Flat 212 didn't belong to a city boy, though. It was the London pied-à-terre of Martin Cooper, and a handy base from which Seb and Claire could visit their prospective universities. If they got the results they needed, Claire would be going to study nursing at Middlesex University, part of the Project 2000 initiative to get more people into the profession. Seb was hoping to get the grades to go to the Bartlett, UCL's prestigious architectural school on Gower Street, for 7 years of study so he could follow in his father's footsteps. Since as long as he could remember, Seb had loved to build. Play-Doh, Duplo, Lego, Meccano. He had wanted to do his school work experience with his dad and Roger at the Curtis & Cooper office in Oxford, but Martin was out of the country that week and fixed him up with a friend in St. Peter Port. After that week, Seb loved it even more. He loved drawing, imagining, creating. And when his dad was in Oxford, or London, or away, Seb would sit in his study on the top floor of the glass house on the hill overlooking the channel and imagine his dad's desk was his own, as his mother painted. Martin's desk, with its pens, tracing paper and scale rule, looked out towards Jersey. Penelope's view on the other side of the top floor faced the Breton coastline. As a boy, Seb loved to roam between the two workspaces, between the different worlds his parents created. His father's lines of physics, precision and building blocks, his mother's more whimsical strokes. Seb decided from a young age that he wanted to be an architect like his father. Not only did he love building, but he liked the reliability of it, the safety of his dad's hands and sketches, the process. His mum might sell a painting a month, she might sell 10. Seb liked nice things enough to know he wanted a regular, solid income. Following a career in architecture showed dedication and creativity, two attributes Seb admired in Martin, even though he was often away and he missed him terribly. He knew his father was working on some amazing structure, whether it was a leisure centre in Banbury, a hotel in the Canaries, or a housing project in Addis Ababa. Martin had trained with Roger and set up the practice with him in Roger's hometown of Oxford in the mid-1980s. He'd commuted from Guernsey to Oxford on a fortnightly rotation, staying in the granny annex of Roger and Dora's home, or using it as a base for trips, until Dora's parents moved into the annex in the 1990s and Martin bought the flat in Limehouse. He believed East London was a great investment. It was getting a makeover with Millennium money, and it was close to City Airport, connecting him to Guernsey, and a drivable distance to the Curtis & Cooper office on Cowley Road in Oxford. Plus, it was a convenient base for Martin, Penelope and Seb to stay for weekend trips to the mainland, or ahead of big family holidays out of Gatwick. It was super handy for Seb and his friends when they had been checking out universities. "It's all a bit tidy," Claire noted, looking at the clear surfaces and sparse decor. "Yeah, he has a cleaner," Seb nodded, without thinking too much about it. It wasn't so much that, Claire thought. More the generic artwork that looked as if it had been sold with the apartment in the show home phase. "I didn't realise your dad was so anal." "You've seen how tidy his corner of the top floor is," Seb laughed, comparing an architect's space to that of a painter. "And he's not been here lately. Lanzarote is taking up so much of his time." Seb had hoped to overlap with his dad for a few hours in London, but he was working on a luxe sports resort in the Canary Islands. A large consolation was that he and Claire could romp around the flat as freely as they fancied, so he pulled her in for a kiss, then went to put on some music. Seb opened a console cupboard to look for the hi-fi he remembered his dad using last time they had all stayed there. He must have been 15 or 16, and they'd been to a family friend's big Greek wedding, first at the Orthodox Church on Moscow Road, and then to a party at Hampton Court Palace. As they'd got back to the apartment on Limehouse Marina, Martin had put on his Best of Burt Bacharach CD and held Penelope in a small turning circle as they danced to What the World Needs Now Is Love by Jackie DeShannon. Penelope was almost as tall as Martin in heels, and they made a handsome couple. It had made Seb grimace and go to bed in the room they'd just dumped their rucksacks in, but he had fallen into a contented slumber, happy in the knowledge his parents adored each other. He flipped through the stack of CDs and stopped at The Very Best of Marvin Gaye. "That'll do," he laughed. "You sure he's away now?" Claire asked, seeing the twinkle in Seb's eye. "Definitely," Seb said, pulling Claire into him and squeezing her bottom. She flushed red. Her tight jeans and puffed gilet were too hot for summer in the city. "Well, it would be nice to play house for a few days. Imagine what it might be like to live together." They hadn't much space with Claire's younger sisters always around at home, and Penelope always painting in the lookout room on the top floor. They kissed in the middle of the living room to the opening notes of I Heard It Through the Grapevine, the vamping bass line tempered with a tambourine, as Seb untucked Claire's top from her jeans waist. "Not now," she said, with a schoolmarm edge, before pulling away. "Later." Claire had a way of levelling Seb. She was good at keeping him in check, when he was about to drink snakebite and black with his mates, when he was ordering a frivolous takeaway despite his mum having left them dinner in the oven, when he was speeding around the island in the sports car his mum never drove. Claire's sensible wholesomeness was the perfect counter to Seb's recklessness. She knew how to help him along the right path, and right now, the right path was the Marina walkway to the nearest Tesco Metro to get supplies. "Let's get some pasta and sauce, eh? Maybe walk along the river?" "Okay," Seb conceded, his rumbling tummy countering his urge to take their clothes off. He kissed Claire's straight nose. She paused and kissed him back. He really was very sexy, and she was very excited to be alone with him in London. His hands started to roam again. "Stop it! We need food!" She laughed as she pulled back and threw her bag across her body. "Oh, hang on," she said, pivoting from the living room to the kitchen to see what essentials were there. "There's no point buying pasta if there are already bags of it." She opened a few cupboards and slammed them shut on seeing crockery, salt and condiments. There was a half-full packet of pasta bows, some Cadbury's animal biscuits, a weathered ketchup bottle, a few tins of tuna. "Jesus, I thought your dad was more sophisticated than that." Claire laughed as she opened another cupboard. "They're probably all mine, and massively out of date." Seb picked up the animal's biscuits to see if he should try them. "Cookbooks," Claire said with a guffaw. "I didn't think your dad was the Ken Hom type." "He isn't, but he buys them all for my mum, so she can make fancy dinners, and he name-drop chefs." Seb rolled his eyes affectionately. Bluebird, Ken Hom, Rick Stein, the Quaglino's cookbook. Seb pulled out the colourful spine of the Quaglino's one. "He's definitely not going to make lamb ravioli with these Tesco pasta bows," Claire said, looking over Seb's shoulder as he flicked through with a bemused half-smile. A page opened with a postcard slotted inside it, which fell to the floor at his feet. On the front it said Redstone Lake, under a photo of a silver-haired man on water skis with "Wish You Were Here" in an arc over the man's head. It looked as if it was taken in the 1950s and was quite camp. On the back was a Canadian stamp and a fairly incomprehensible script. "Oh, it's from Uncle Roger." Roger was famous for his hieroglyphic scrawl, so much so that Seb didn't think to try to decipher the card. But the address caught his eye. Marty and Tina Cooper. "Tina?" Claire leaned over his shoulder as he crouched on the kitchen floor. Seb tried to think of an affectionate nickname Roger might have for his mother. He'd only ever heard him call her Penelope Pitstop or penny from heaven, but that was more to echo Martin when he'd had a few brandies. Nothing to do with Tina. It didn't make any sense. He didn't remember Roger ever calling his mother Tina. Then he looked at the address. Hope Cottage, the Baldens, Oxfordshire. From Seb's silence, Claire could tell he was discombobulated. Did your parents ever live in Oxfordshire? Maybe when your dad and Roger were setting up? Seb turned the postcard over a few times. No, he stayed with them at times, but that's not Roger's address. Seb stood up and squinted to look at the postmark. It says 1995, 2 years ago. Well, it must be someone with the same name and they crossed paths. Although it says Marty, not Martin. He sometimes calls Dad Marty. And why would Roger send another man called Marty Cooper a postcard from his holiday? Are you sure that's Roger? Seb read out the postcard slowly as he translated the scrawls. You really ought to take a holiday, you bloody martyr. Roger, Dora, and the girls. That's Roger. Well, that doesn't even make sense. We go on holidays, Seb said slightly defensively. Maybe it was intended for another friend, another Martin, and he got the last names mixed up. Then why would it have ended up in this flat if it wasn't for my dad? Maybe it's a name-address mix-up. Remember last Christmas, Francesca Smith stopped speaking to Emma Palin because Emma accidentally mixed up the Christmas cards with the envelopes? Seb scowled. Claire wittered. She had said in Lily Simpson's card, Happy Christmas to my best friend in the whole world, but put it in Francesca's envelope, and Francesca went ballistic. That's what will have happened. Your mum and dad would have got some equally offensive postcard destined for whoever lives in Oxfordshire, probably addressed to Bill and Penelope or something, and he's muddled up the names. He was probably drunk writing them, knowing Roger. But my dad did get this postcard. This is all so weird. Come on, let's go. I'm getting hungry. On their walk to Tesco Metro, on their trip along St. Catherine Docks, where Seb convinced Claire to forget about the pasta and sauce and eat at Pizza Express instead, he had a sick feeling about Roger's postcard. It didn't make sense. But he couldn't work out what did make sense. Less so after 3 bottles of Peroni. Back at the flat, Claire got out the Jerry Maguire VHS she'd rented and packed. She said the cinema in Leicester Square was silly money. And they watched it. Seb didn't even try to have sex with her. He just sat stewing about the postcard, now propped up on the kitchen worktop. When Claire had fallen asleep, Seb went back to the kitchen and picked it up again. The joy of the image. A catalogue man with silver hair and a taut chest, waving at the camera as if the photographer were a mistress. Its sunshine, vitality and cheekiness irked Seb. So he walked over to the phone on the kitchen wall and dialed directory inquiries. What name, please? Cooper. And the address? Hope Cottage, the Baldens. Hope Cottage, the what? Baldens. Can you spell that, please? Seb peered at the card. Baldons, I think. Hope Cottage, the Baldens, Oxon? Yes, that's it. I'm sorry, that number's ex-directory. The next morning, Seb told Claire he wasn't going to Gower Street to do the tour of the architectural faculty at UCL. He was going to Oxford instead. What? To the office? Your dad's away. Claire knew Seb could be impulsive. His eyes had a steely determination behind their brightness. But this seemed mad. Seb, you've not slept all night. You're not thinking straight. I am. I have to go. Because of a postcard. You'll miss so much. You might even blow your chance of a place. No, I won't. It's not an interview.
I've got the offer, I just have to get the grades.
Claire's kind brown eyes implored him, and Seb softened a little.
I'll jump on tomorrow's tour. They probably won't even notice. Shepherding one less person one day and one more the next. I'll just say I was sick today, or my flight was cancelled and I got over a day late. No one will give a shit.
The university was running tours over the Wednesday and Thursday, but Claire had hoped to go with Seb to see his uni before looking at hers in Edmonton on the Thursday. Seb was always more cavalier than Claire, and it irritated her. I give a shit. If you do your tour tomorrow, we can't see each other's unis. Seb shrugged.
Doesn't matter, does it?
Claire looked hurt.
Our offers aren't dependent on each other,
Seb snapped, though as he said it, he knew it was too sharp. Sorry, he conceded. Seb, what's wrong?
Are you coming or not?
2 tubes, a train, and a taxi ride later, they pulled up at the address on the postcard, and Seb looked from it to the words above the door. Hope Cottage, in a clean white font cutely curved over a dove-grey door. A rampant lilac rose was pegged back so it didn't collapse under the weight of its bountiful blooms. A white picket fence set a neat boundary to an English country garden, framing a symmetrical chocolate box home.
Here you go, mate,
said the taxi driver chirpily. Seb looked through the open window hesitantly. What are you going to do? Claire asked, touching Seb's arm.
What do you mean?
Well, we're here at 3 in the afternoon. What are you wanting to do, or expecting to say? I think I've got your postcard. How about a cup of tea and some cake? What if no one's in? We wait, post it through the door? We should keep the taxi. Claire looked around to the village green, a little pub, the road up ahead with a tree canopy tunnel back to the A road. They shouldn't let the taxi go. It had already cost £20 from Oxford Station. They didn't want to be stranded in the middle of nowhere. Seb shook out of a daydream-like state.
Wait here, then.
Huh?
Won't be a second, mate,
Seb said to the cabbie. He opened the car door. Wait! Claire slid along the seat and climbed out behind him. Please don't go anywhere, she said to the driver, pressing her palms together. The driver chuckled.
You ain't paid me yet, love. I'm not going anywhere.
Claire nodded, honest eyes reassuring him. Seb opened the gate to the cottage and walked up the path. The lilac rose bounced a little in the summer breeze as he knocked on a black circular door handle with a solid rat-a-tat-tat. Mother! Came an instant bellow from behind the front door. A girl's voice. A muffled, indistinguishable call came from beyond that. I can't, the girl hollered, a petulant-sounding prima donna. I'm not the fucking butler. Seb and Claire looked at each other and almost laughed before a thunder of footsteps indicated the door was about to be opened, somewhat begrudgingly. They were surprised when a dumpy-looking pre-teen in a peach-coloured satin dress opened the door. Her Shirley Temple ringlets jarred with her surly face. Oh, Seb said, surprised at the sight in front of him. The girl's haughty face and arched eyebrows didn't match her childlike attire and sloped shoulders. Yes, she said, disparagingly. Her face was entitled and incredulous. Her chin wobbled against the bow at the neck of her dress.
Oh, yes,
said Seb, clutching the postcard in his left hand.
I'm looking for, Marty or Tina Cooper.
Seb wondered why this girl wasn't mentioned on the postcard.
It must have been a mix-up. Maybe Roger really is drinking too much.
Well, who do you want, Martin or Tina? Seb and Claire heard a woman call out from up the plush carpeted stairs. The decor behind the girl looked as chintzy and twee as her dress. Who is it, darling? Called a warbling, wobbling voice. The girl frowned at Seb and Claire as she looked them up and down, and went to open her mouth, but it was clamped shut in puzzlement.
If it's the car, I'm not ready. The woman upstairs, Tina, they presumed, called.
Oh, it doesn't matter.